I'm Usha Srinivasan, and I'm the co-founder and president and CEO of Mosaic America. Until recently, we were called Sangam Arts. And our mission at Mosaic is to help strengthen diverse American communities through intercultural and co-created arts. I am a rather recent entrant into the world of arts and the world of nonprofits. I actually arrived in the US in 1990 to go to grad school in engineering, and then I moved, worked all over the place and got my green card and moved here to the Bay Area in 95 to go to business school at Stanford. And then I was a high-tech product manager and worked in high-tech for almost 13 or 14 years after. And like many people who are new immigrants here, it takes us a while to really start realizing that this is now our home. And for me, that happened once I had a family. When I started a family, I had kids, all of a sudden, you realize you need to really grapple with these issues around identity and belonging, And so around this time, we're talking about kind of 2010 or 12, was the first time I started looking around to see what does the community look like? What is my role in the community? What is my identity as an immigrant, as an Indian American? And one of the things that really struck me was, despite being so diverse and becoming increasingly so, the Silicon Valley was actually less integrated. And I think part of the problem is as we were transforming from an agricultural center to a high-tech hub, the labor forces, the labor markets, and the kinds of skills we needed were people that were coming here from elsewhere. So, the needs of the labor market transformed. As a result, we have these demographic shifts. We went from being probably about 65 to 70% white in the 80s and early 90s to now we are like a majority minority community. When that kind of demographic shift, especially along racial and ethnic lines, happens in such a short period of time, the kind of cultural siloing we see is bound to happen, right? So we see, for example, Indian Americans doing their own thing, living, eating, praying, playing with people that they are most comfortable with. Same thing for other communities. And so for me, I was just trying to figure out, why is this? And why are we all so siloed? Why do we not have a national identity or an identity of a community that transcends these boundaries? And so that was what led me to actually launch this organization called Sangam Arts, because being from India, I firsthand, being raised in India in the 70s, I firsthand have experienced the power of art to build bridges. India today is very different, but the India that I grew up in is highly secular and was founded on principles of, kind of unity and diversity. I grew up in a multicultural, pluralistic society, which was really where a lot of the grout that held our mosaic together were the arts. We all kind of practiced our cultural arts, our forms of artistic expression freely, and we were completely comfortable with being around people that didn't look, eat, or play or pray like us. But that was the kind of cultural competency that developed over centuries as India was colonized and invaded and settled and so on. Here, we are talking about changes that have happened in such a short period of time that we have not had chance to develop cultural competency. So my mission and the mission of my organization is really to help us all kind of become more comfortable with this level of diversity and to achieve that level of comfort and cultural competency through the arts. And what does that mean actually in practice? It means that we at Mosaic identify artists and culture bearers in different diverse communities, bring them together to collaborate and co-create new works that not only showcase our glorious diversity, but highlight the common threads that run through us all. And by bringing artists together in a meaningful, deliberate way, not as a cultural safari, we bring audiences together. And that creates shared experiences that we oftentimes lack. And so that's kind of our work at Mosaic. And, Ron has been with an advisor to us from the very beginning when this was still a gleam in my eye. And today here we are, and I'm so thrilled to be part of this group and have the opportunity to bring my message. I believe that there's obviously racism is a very complicated, complex, multi, faceted issue that we can grapple with on multiple levels. But the one level that I choose to focus on, there's actually two things that I choose to focus on, is art can be a powerful medium for building an entire movement, an anti-racist movement, right? Arts as a every social movement has a powerful and strong artistic element, whether it is, their own anthems or songs or flags or mottos or symbols. So definitely, even the BLM posters are a work of art, right? So I think arts can certainly help galvanize, catalyze movements for change. But what we focus on in Mosaic is we believe that racism is oftentimes rooted in ignorance, in fear of the other, in misplaced fear oftentimes, right? In stereotypes that are not grounded in reality. And so we believe that, yes, you can certainly kind of come up with textbooks and presentations and brochures to counter that, but nothing is more powerful than shared experiences. If you encounter people that you have stereotyped and othered, but you see them in a different context, and you realize that what you assumed about them was wrong, and in fact, you share a lot more in common with them than the differences. I think that can be a very powerful factor. So I'll give you an example of the kind of work we do to address this. So Ron mentioned the Japanese American internment or concentration camp. For new immigrants, like for example, the Indian Americans that have only been here in large numbers, since the 80s and 90s, we don't have a shared experience of the history of the land. And oftentimes we come here upwardly mobile with no debt, with fancy degrees, but we are building our success on the backs of those communities and people that have worked hard and fought hard and won the rights, like John Lewis and others, people who made good trouble in order to win these victories that have allowed people like us to kind of waltz in. But now that we're here, we lack the understanding of what went into fighting those battles and winning those rights for us. And not having that understanding of history can make us not only complacent, but apathetic. And we sometimes lack empathy for those very communities that have helped build this Silicon Valley. So for example, we commissioned a work called Precious Scars, which told the story of Japanese American internment, but used kind of music, especially multicultural music and multimedia and art, like visual arts, photographs from the different concentration camps across California, to tell the story of xenophobia. But that was the basis of the Japanese American internment. But the way the music was played was we used instruments and works composed by Muslim Americans, Mexican Americans, because those are communities that continue to face the same xenophobia and racism that was the cause of the Japanese American internment. So art can be a powerful way of transporting people across time, of delivering strong messages that hit you kind of at the core, that can really deliver emotion. And when you deliver them through the arts. And so that's one example of how we counter racism. We very deliberately look for bringing together artists from different communities and give them the time and space to learn about each other. When we bring in a Mexican folklorico dancer and we team them up with like an Indian folk dancer or a Filipino folk dancer, give them time to learn about how some of those traditions are all rooted in the same principles, right? Whether it's principles of keeping men fighting fit for war, or it is celebrating harvest or celebrating births, whatever that is. So I think that especially multicultural arts can be a powerful tool for helping kind of dispel stereotypes, for helping develop that cultural competency that can go a long way in countering racism. I'll tell you, it was kind of, it's part of our origin story in Mosaic. My daughter, when she was in sixth grade, she's now a high school senior, but she was in sixth grade and she went to the STEM school in San Jose. And like most STEM schools, these days you see a lot of, Indian, Chinese students with a few other smattering of others. She came home one day and she was all excited about something. And she said, Amma, there's this Asian kid in my class. And I go, what do you mean Asian kid? India is in Asia, right? It's like, because I didn't grow up over here, I had no idea that, the kids called, when they said Asian, they meant Far East, Southeast Asian. So we started having this conversation about what other kind of Americans are in your class. She said, well, we have the Desi Americans who are South Asian. We have one African American, a Mexican American. So I said, who's American in your class? And she said, well, that would be Isabel. And then she thought for a minute and she said, oh, but Isabel's parents are just visiting here for 2 years from Ireland, right? So this child who's born and raised over here is self-hyphenating and calling herself, Indian American, calling somebody else Asian American, but conferring the all-American identity on somebody purely based on what they look like, right? So we have a problem with our youth, right? And there is this really, the fact that our identity, and this is not just along racial and cultural lines, it's also around sexual orientation, around ability. There's so many ways in which we are being divided. Some of that division is because we are told that, but my kid has been a product of privilege over here. We grew up here in Saratoga. She's not experienced racism. She's part of a pretty big group of, a significant Indian community. And yet, as Americans, we have all internalized this notion that the all-American identity belongs to white, Anglo-Saxon, Judeo-Christian, and everybody else is a hyphenated American waiting in the margins to somehow become American. And I think that was what led to Mosaic, because it kind of dawned on us that part of the problem in America right now is the model for social integration that we have kind of adopted and accepted for centuries is that of a melting pot. You can come here from anywhere in the world, and in this crucible of democracy and freedom, you can forge an all-American identity. Well, the truth is that only was valid for the first 3 or 4 waves of immigrants. It never applied to our Black brothers and sisters. It completely ignored our Mexican indigenous populations. But it basically applied to those immigrants that came here with one-way tickets from Western Europe or Northern Europe that were fleeing persecution or war or famine or seeking opportunities that the Industrial Revolution offered. But they were able to come here, and after a generation, the bargain seemed fair. You kind of live in your Italian or Polish or Irish ghetto for a generation, stop speaking your language or acting the way or embracing your culture, and in one generation, you will be awarded with an American identity. Well, the truth is, post 1965, after the Hart-Celler Act, large numbers of immigrants are coming from Asia, Latin America, much more diverse backgrounds, racially, ethnically. And in the meanwhile, the world has gotten smaller, right? The world has gotten, the communications are cheaper, travel is cheaper. We have WhatsApp. I know exactly what's going on in my hometown in India right now. I'm up on all the stuff. So it's very hard to give up your identity, right? There's really no reason. But above all, even if we gave it all up, if my daughter decided tomorrow, I'm going to not eat curry, I'm going to anglicize my name, that's it, I'm done being Indian American, I'm American, well, she'll still be asked, where are you really from? Because that is the flaw in the American model, right? We rely on we have a very narrow definition of all American. And so what we need to do is to break those assumptions, right? Redefine what it means to be American. What should unite us, the only thing that should be in common among Americans, is our love for country, our love for American values of freedom, liberty, justice, equality. Everything else has nothing to do whether you're American or not. How you dress, who you pray to, not relevant, right? And we can start that with the arts, by any art created by an American is American art. It doesn't have to be just Eurocentric art. Mariachi is every bit as American as flamenco when an American is creating it. And so I think with our youth, we have an opportunity, to kind of bring that perspective. It's much harder with people of my generation, especially first generation immigrants. With youth, we have that opportunity, and yet, to your point, Margot, in schools, that's not happening. So we have to figure out a way to kind of, change that way. And it's hard, painstaking work that has to happen in the grassroots.